Hello, my name's Mike Panaki with Network Protocol Specialists, and I'd like to welcome you to this, for lack of a better term, I've been calling it Geek Talk, where I can get an opportunity to talk to some folks about different technologies and so on. Today, we are having, we have Jim Davis and Wayne Allen on from Fluke Networks, and we are going to be talking about certification versus calibration. Hi, Jim. Hey, Wayne.
And even versus qualification. Hey, Mike, good to see you.
Good to see you, Mike. Welcome. Greetings from down under.
Thank you. Let's see. I'm just going to log into LinkedIn.
You're having a lovely spring day down there, aren't you?
It's only 30 centigrade outside at the moment.
Oh, so it's spring, not summer.
I thought I'd just rub that in a little bit, and you guys being up in every.
Well, I like the way the screen oriented us as well. So you being on the, of course, it's from your perspective, it's backwards, and you should be on the top.
Yeah, well, it's just the way we look at the world.
Well, apparently we're having a little trouble getting this to broadcast in LinkedIn. They said that they're working on it in the background, but I'm not sure why. LinkedIn
probably a cabling issue.
Oh, that could be it.
No, go ahead and spend a minute troubleshooting. We'll let everyone join in.
Let me just make sure our everything's going well here before we let me just check on YouTube real quick. And so why don't you guys give me a little bit about your background while I'm just checking to make sure that we are actually streaming out here.
Wayne, go ahead.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I've been with Fluke Networks or associated with Fluke Networks for the last nearly 30 years that Fluke Networks has been running. With Fluke and Philips Test and Measurement when we're combined now for 32 years. So I've got a comms background. I've been doing communications in commercial and military environments for the last 40 years. So I got a fairly good background in that environment. I also work on standards like a lot of other Fluke Networks people. Being from the bottom half of the world, as Jim mentioned, that I live down in the basement of the world, I get involved in a lot of the ISO standards and how that goes together. So it's interesting, and this is a great topic that Mike came up with, and I think you will find this quite interesting on our thoughts. Jim.
Yeah, no pressure to to set the expectations, but anything we can do to help clarify in the market. Here are these different products and they serve different roles, and let's help people understand the difference between them. My name is Jim Davis. I've worked with Fluke Networks for a little bit more than 20 years now. And I've been working in the cabling market coming up on 30 years now. I like to say that I joined the market when in category 4. And yeah, we were talking the other day with Mike, and he said, hey, would you guys like to come on and discuss a subject? And I appreciate the opportunity that you have brought us in to bring to this discussion today. Hopefully we'll have something interesting to talk about here.
Couldn't think of two better people to have in here talking about this. Because this is something that I get asked about often, and that is what's the right tool to get? And, it's funny, when I started in the networking business back in 95 is when I moved out of being a network administrator to doing this professionally. I kind of had this goal that I did not want to answer anything with "it depends." And what I found is the longer I'm in this business,
how's that going for you?
the longer I run it, the more times I run into it depends. And so when it came to certification versus qualification, I thought, what a great opportunity to talk about where these fit in, because it's just like, I look at my shop and I think of all the different tools I have. I just got a brand new 23 gauge pin nailer, yesterday for putting some trim in, and I've got a framing nailer. So I'm not going to use the framing nailer shooting big framing nails in to hold up the trim. And if I'm framing up a wall or something, I'm not going to use the pin nailer shooting a 23 gauge pin. So anytime we work with tools, there's the appropriate tool for the job. So I thought, what a great opportunity for us to talk about, where those fit in and when we use each of those different tools.
Makes perfect sense. And often people use the wrong tool.
Yes,
and come
they
up with
do.
the wrong conclusion.
Yeah. And there's, always the point where the only thing I have is a hammer. So
then everything looks like a nail, right?
Yeah. But if you had the choice, let's pick the right hammer.
And speaking of tools, I mean, I know that you guys have some tools there where you're at. I went through and kind of dug out some of the ones that I had handy right off that, fall into this category. We've got, our IntelliTone here. We've got our Versiv 2 with a DSX 8000 module in it. I've got my trusty Cable IQ. I can tell you, I love this. The one mistake I made on a project one time is I didn't realize the patch cord I was using with it was a crossover cable. And I thought, I'm sure I punched all these down right, but the Cable IQ is telling me that they're wired as crossovers. So I rewired everything only to find out that it was the cable. So, there's a case where the cable that we plug into these becomes important if we're not using something like a permanent link adapter that goes on the certifier. And I've got my micro scanner. I've got my brand new fiber alert that I haven't even unpackaged yet. So excited to give that a try. But, let's talk about this. So is certification the only way to go?
Yes. I guess we're finished.
Yep. From the leading certification house, yes, certainly, but there's always got to be a but in this business.
Sure.
Jim, you want to leave with the but?
Well, Mike, I think you brought up a good point yesterday. We didn't rehearse this a lot, obviously, but you brought up the point about certification being a very accurate measurement combined with a standard that tells us how accurate the measurement should be and what the measurements should be. So if we're going to start at the top with certification is going to tell you that any compliant device that plugs into this cabling will work. This cabling will support everything. And the standard, what I like about following the standard is I may not know. I may not be familiar. If I'm getting in an elevator, I want to know that the elevator cable meets the standard. The standard may be overkill, but the elevator's not gonna fall. So certification is a good way. It's the experience of the industry. That's our best guidance. Wayne, you've been in the standards meetings. I've been in standards meetings as well. You need to get agreement, which is always difficult from a large group of people with different interests. And that's not just cable people and test equipment people, it's active equipment manufacturers. This needs to work for the active equipment manufacturers. And if they can all contribute and decide on what the measurement should be, then you can have confidence that everything is going to work on a certified link.
And that's a really good point. And as we were talking yesterday, one of the things that I like to say to people is, if you were buying petrol from a service station, it's not gas station in this part of the world, it's service station. Are you going to really fill the tank of your car up from a petrol bowser that you don't know is actually delivering a gallon or a litre correctly? Are you going to put your hand in your pocket and pay for something you didn't get? Would you let your wife go to the butcher shop and buy meat where the scales were not measuring a kilogram or a pound correctly? And the same goes for your data cabling. You're paying very good money for your data cabling. And in a lot of cases, that data cabling is going to stay in the building for 10, 15, 20 years. I saw a building the other day, it was 25-year-old data cabling. you want some assurance that you're going to get your money's worth out of that cabling. And that's where certification comes in, because it's what I like to say, application agnostic. We don't care what application you're putting there. We're looking at a set of parameters that's been agreed on by some pretty bright people, that if we meet these criteria, this is going to work no matter what you're going to run across this cabling. And that's where certification comes from. We take it a bit of an agnostic view. We don't care what protocol you want to run, but if you do it, install it the correct way, test it the correct way, which is certification, you have some level of guarantee that this is going to, the word we often say is fit for purpose. So the purpose you want this cabling for, you've got some guarantee that it will work. So that's how I like to look at it.
Well, and I think one thing that we see, especially when it comes to things like recertifying a link for future standards, is that with certification, you're saving that accurate test measurement, right? I mean, you're not saving a pass-fail. You're saving
Correct.
the test measurement, and then you are giving a pass-fail based on how that test measurement compares to a standard.
Correct. And what I like to say to people is, well, when you're looking at a result, say, yeah, okay, I know the Fluke equipment really well. When you look at a recertification to see if it'll support a future capability, all you're really doing is moving the goalposts. When you did your initial measurement, and you might have got a pass-fail from that measurement, you had your goalpost at a particular point. If the world has changed, all we need to do is move the goalpost with recertification. You've got the initial raw measurement data, so that has never changed. So you could quite easily recertify a link, and it will, yeah, it's a valid method of approaching the link.
Yeah, and it's probably important for us to point out, for those who don't know, what standards we're talking about and what measurements we're talking about. Here in North America, people often follow the TIA 568 standard, which defines the performance of the cable and the connectors, the physical characteristics to make sure there's interoperability. And for the field testing, it used to be in the 568 standard, but now we have the TIA 1152 standard. It's on the A revision, and that standard tells us what we need to measure. We're going to measure signal, loss of signal, and we're going to measure noise. The noise measurements are crosstalk, interference, and return loss reflections. And when we're looking at a certification tool, if we're trying to decide what is a certification tool, we have that 1152 standard that defines the accuracy requirements of the tool. So you can look and see, there can be an independent third party that will say, this tool meets the level 3 or level 3E or level 4 or level 2G accuracy requirements for the testing. The accuracy level depends on whether you're doing category 5E or category 6 or category 8. Wayne, in the ISO world, is that all covered by 11801?
Yeah, there's a couple of documents we refer to, like the TIA 568 is the master document, and for the North American environment. The ISO 11801 is the master document in the ISO world. You have the 1152 document for field testing, and in TIA, in ISO, we have the 61935-1 document that talks about, for copper cabling, how we'll field test that cabling. And of course, in both standards environments, we also have fiber optic standards as well. The 568.3D, soon to be E, in the North American environment, the TIA environment, and the 14763-3 in the ISO environment. But I think it's important to point out today there is very little differences in those standards. There's tenths of dB's difference in a lot of areas, but the approach is the same. The same measurements are carried out. ISO carries out a few more, but they're derived measurements. As long as you've got the base measurements, you can do the extra calculations. But I think key for our customers is whichever standards selection that your part of the world uses, have confidence that those numbers have been calculated correctly and they are going to work for you.
So we've got certification, right? We're taking, I've got a module in my certifier that has been calibrated at the factory service center. I can take a measurement. I can have confidence in that measurement. There we go. I compare that with a standard and I'm set to go. Let's talk about qualifiers. How does a qualifier like a Link IQ, like a Cable IQ, how do those compare with a certification tool?
What I like about Cable IQ and the new Link IQ is they're following that same application agnostic idea that Wayne mentioned, where they're measuring how much signal there is and they're measuring how much noise there is. So we're trying to give you an idea of the shape, the size of your data pipe. Now, it of course will be pointed out by somebody that certification tools are more expensive. I'll mention that really expensive is when your network doesn't work and you got to call in for help. And so I always like to, when I first install my network, say, just certify it. Now, if you're troubleshooting it, it's been certified and something's not working. This idea of a qualification tool is not as accurate. It's not as accurate as the certification tool. That allows us to use components with wider tolerances. You know, we're not going to be good on the edge cases, but we may not measure all of the parameters. This is a single-ended test, and the standards say, hey, you have to run the test in both directions. So the qualifier is measuring how much signal and measuring near-end crosstalk and return loss, length, delay skew, but not to the level of accuracy of the certification tools. Wayne, do you have
I think that's a pretty good assessment there. Yeah, qualification tools are more looking at key parameters, so key indicators that on the balance here. My cabling was certified originally, but something's now gone down or it's not working correctly. They provide you with a level of measurement capability that you can quickly look at the system to diagnose where the problem may be. And as Jim pointed out, having a network down could be more costly than actually investing in the right tool. Think about lost productivity. I think three of us are probably familiar with one many years ago, back in the days when we had land meter, where one of the airlines' booking system went down, and yeah, we got involved and supplied some analysis tools. But the losses per minute when a critical network system is down is phenomenal, all for the sake of a few $1,000s to have the right tool on hand to help you get it back up again. So sometimes it's false economy by not investing or not spending some money and having the right tools on hand. And I think that's where quality qualification tools fit into your network profile as a tool that is your go-to tool. Wow, I'm glad I wasn't on the source last night. To make certain things will work. Yeah, just as Mike said earlier on, he got himself screwed up with patch cords. Well, a qualification tool will check a patch cord and see it's wired correctly for you. Am I patching into the right part of the network? I've seen networks brought down by a mispatch. have I got the right switchboard? Am I on the right VLAN to actually make this thing work? The way I like to think of it is certification tools take a lot of the guesswork out of, guesswork is probably the best word I could use in there. Australian expression would be suck it and see. Ooh, I'll change this one. Oh, that didn't work. I'll change this one. We
Sure.
call that suck it and see.
Okay. Swap it and see.
Yeah.
So I mean, like when we go through in the CCTT training, one of the things I bring up is the limit lines, which is, I discovered yesterday, is a subset, is a large subset, but a subset of the total number of test limits that I have available on the Versiv. And there's 302 pages of them. So when I move to a qualification tool, oftentimes, and this is something that is important to note, is that when we go in and we certify a cable, we don't typically certify it to an application. We certify it to a cabling standard, Cat 6A plus PoE, Cat 6A plus all, depending on what tests we want to run. So when I'm using a qualification tool, am I typically testing that cable to a cabling standard, or am I testing it to an application standard like 2.5 G base T?
Yeah, that's an important point. A qualification tool will not tell you if the cabling is category 5E or category 6.
Okay.
It will, because we've got this big fat category 5E pipe. I'm only using a little bit of it. And that's what we're checking. Now, what this little bit of it, if we look at the IEEE 802.3 standard, the Ethernet standard, what the Ethernet standard says is to look at the ISO 11801 standard, and that will guide the cabling that will support Ethernet. So we know that 10 base T, we know that 100 base T, we know that gigabit Ethernet doesn't need 100 megahertz in the pipe. It runs on this. And so our qualification tool, you won't see it telling you that you have category 5 or category 6 cable. You'll see it telling you this cable will support gigabit, or this cable will support 5 gigabit transmissions.
So with a certification tool, I am running a test to say that anything that can run on 6A, Cat 6A, will run on this cable. With a qualification tool, I am saying 10G base T will run on this cable. I'm saying that gig will run on this cable. And so the equivalent I give is, I've got my 94 Suburban with a dump trailer, weighs 9,500 pounds if don't have it loaded up for the dump. So if I drive that across a bridge, I can say this bridge will carry my Suburban and dump trailer, but I can't say that this bridge is good for 25 tons. So I'm testing it for an application. And so for a network administrator, that's a good test, right? I mean, that's because that's the application they're running across that.
Something is not working.
Right.
The new box you installed is not working. And of course, it's the fault of the cabling, because, boy, it's a lot easier for it to be the cabling's fault than the new box's fault.
Right.
And so we start with testing the cabling, and the qualifier is a great place to make sure you're plugged in. As Wayne mentioned, make sure you're plugged into the right port of the switch. The switch is configured the right way. Now, I'm not sure that I'm going to go to a giant networking switch manufacturer and say, your switch port is bad because my device is not working. I might want to have some better ammunition there to say this is really the shape of the cabling before I take that step.
Well, and so there's one more piece of this, and that we didn't put in the title, and we really didn't put in the topics, but it's something that that certainly came up yesterday, and that is throughput, right? I mean, we've got certification, we've got qualification, and then, for decades, I've been running iPerf, right? And we've been using other tools to go in and do throughput testing of the network, which allows me to potentially bump things up a layer. I'm moving clear up into layer 3, layer 4 of the OSI model by using UDP or TCP for doing the transmission of the traffic. I can go through routers and switches. So, oftentimes people come back and say, well, why don't I just do an iPerf test? And I'm going to throw a PC on each end and do a throughput test and see if that's good enough.
That's been valid in the past. But what I say to people is, what's the front side bus speed of your PC? How fast can your PC handle that traffic? And I think a lot of people would be astounded that actually PC technology is greatly enhanced these days, but the front side bus is not in the gigabit speeds in a lot of cases, depending on the quality of the PC you're using. So when you come down to using iPerf, it's a good bet your PC is not quite capable of generating the traffic that you actually need. And if you start moving into Wi-Fi 6, or hey, if you want to go to Wi-Fi 7 next year and you want to check that the cabling is capable of handling that sorts of upgrades, you want something that's going to prove out that the cabling and everything is going to support that beforehand. A lot of these devices run M-base-T these days. Hey, I got a switch sitting over here that's it's M-base-T sitting on my desk at the moment. They're pretty common. It's 2.5, 5, and 10 gig just for me to fool around with to see if things are working correctly. Can my cabling support that? A lot of people forget the feeds and speeds are important, but the way I look at things is your lowest common denominator is your cabling system. And if you eliminate the cabling system as being the source of your errors, that makes it a lot easier to troubleshoot down. And you want the basic information first before you try and start. Like if you turn a throughput generator on or iPerf on, and you haven't checked your cabling, it's not going to tell you where your problem is. It just says,
Good point.
no,
If it
I
fails.
can't. Yeah, it's failed. My question is, where has it failed? Do I now have to go and get a contractor in with an expensive certification tool to try and tell me the patch cord was bad, or this piece of cable was damaged in the ceiling space? Whereas if I've got the right tool, it's going to say, well, yeah, your cabling looks bad. Your cabling failed. Yeah, exactly. Near and crosstalk, and hey, it's over here. Or hey, you've got too much return loss in this cable, and it won't go to the higher speeds. Well, that's probably a good point to start with, that you know what you're chasing down. Really, throughput testing just says it doesn't work. It doesn't say where it's not working, and that's in this game. It's getting the network recovered, back up, and working correctly is the key, not whether I've got traffic going through or not. That comes if you've got the right tool.
Yeah.
That's my approach.
Yeah, and I see that there's that variable in the throughput test that you're measuring the quality of the generator of the traffic. And if you're using an instrument that has a high quality interface, a high speed bus, that isn't necessarily the network interface card that your equipment is going to use. And difficult for you to go back to the manufacturer of the box and say, well, my network interface card was able to connect at a gig here, so my cabling must be good and it must be your box that's bad. Maybe it has imagine that, an inexpensive network interface card that doesn't perform as well. But to your point, Mike, certainly there is a time and a place when I want to do some throughput testing. I'd like to avoid doing that to test the cable, because you're only looking at that network interface card. But boy, the network is slow today. Did somebody change something in the configuration? Absolutely. A throughput test is going to show you that, hey, in the core switch, your port was downgraded. They put a little filter on it there, so you can only get so much through, or whatever the
Well,
problem.
and I guess that's a case where, like with one of the customers I was talking to, their demarcation point for where the network, where the cabling ends and the active equipment begins, is the electrical side of the SFP. So they're responsible for the SFPs. And so being able to include that in the test sometimes is good. But as Wayne brought up, when it fails, we need to be able to figure out where it failed. And I imagine now with a copper qualification tool, I'm going to be able to see distance to open, distance to short. I could see, if I fail return, will tell me if I fail return loss.
Yeah, it will tell you if you have an insertion loss failure, if
Okay.
you have a near-end crosstalk, return loss, or a delay skew failure.
Okay.
Those are the measurements that we can accurately run from a single end.
So that gives me an idea of what failed. And there's some things that are important to understand about each one of those. What does that tell me about the cable? If insertion loss, I'm losing too much signal. Near end crosstalk, I've got too much crosstalk between the pairs. Return loss issues, but at least it tells me what failed. But the cables, the reason this test failed, or the reason my network is slow.
Yeah, not just sorry, I couldn't get a gig through here.
Right. And the qualification tool gives us a quick and easy way to validate that the link that we installed is highly likely to run the technology we plan on running across it. Right?
Yeah, and there's certainly a time and a place for that. Of course, we want everyone to have a certification tool, but I appreciate you need to use it fairly regularly for it to make sense. So generally, we see contractors, I have end users ask me, do I need a certification tool or a qualification tool? And I'm curious about how many cables they install. Oh, we do all of our cable installations. We install all our own wireless access points. You probably want a certification tool. Now, if you subcontract the cabling installation and the company who installs the cabling for you has delivered you a certificate, I used the right cable. Well, nice thing about the certification tool, you can train your technicians on how to do the termination the right way. Oh, yeah, I untwisted it too much and I'm failing. So when the cable is first installed, it should be certified. If you're an end user and you don't install your own cables or you just do it onesie twosie, boy, qualification tool is going to be very helpful for you as you do moves, adds, and changes, or when there's that doubt. Is it the cable or is it the box?
So
Very good
now,
point.
will the Link IQ, does it give me any like CDP or LLDP information?
Yeah, then we start getting beyond the qualification, the certification. That's when you start taking advantage of some of the smarts of the active network to say, hey, where am I plugged in? And we use that LLDP not only to know where we're plugged in, but also for the PoE negotiation, where we say,
Right.
hey, how much PoE am I getting? And that PoE negotiation is not something that most cabling contractors ask for. They want us to check, will this road support PoE? And there are parameters in addition to signal and noise that we look at to make sure the cabling will support PoE, loop resistance, resistance on balance. But you probably don't have your PoE switch installed at that moment. So if you have a question about, is this PoE switch working right? And we just had a fun one where with the configuration, that's where a tool like Link IQ will be helpful because it will ask the switch for that power and do a load test and make sure we're getting that power. And it's a little bit scary when a customer comes to you and says, your tool said I'm only getting class 3 and I should be getting class 4. And it's us against a big switch manufacturer who they have confidence they're sending the PoE. And did the whole packet capture, the whole 9 yards, looked at the frames, and we're like, wait a minute, Switch isn't really offering us class 4. And they went into the documentation and found, oh, I forgot to, I said, please give me class 4. But when it popped up and said, are you sure you want class 4? They didn't double click or whatever was required there. So those qualification tools that have some more network focused utilities, I don't need to blink a switch port with my cable tester. I just don't need that. But the qualification tool might be a more practical Swiss Army knife for the network engineer who's keeping the network up and running, or troubleshooting for someone else.
Well, and I think it's important to note too that aside from using the communication Ethernet port on the side of the Versiv, that the certification tools aren't active devices on the network.
No,
right?
And yeah, I was just going to say, giving some practical guidance to people, I connect through my Ethernet port so that I can drive my tester remotely
Yeah.
and
No.
download test results that way.
I
But yeah,
think
no,
it's
go
sorry,
ahead,
Jim.
Wayne, sorry.
I think it's a forgotten part of the field tester, that, hey, there is an Ethernet port on the side, and you want to validate that cable's working. You can get a connection straight up into the network and do all the basic connectivity issues right there on the cable tester. But with that cable, with the Link IQ, one thing, and especially with PoE today and the proliferation of PoE, who's installing a wireless access point today that's not running PoE? If I go back many years and we talk about how a signal propagates down a cable, data uses the skin effect. So it basically travels down the outside of the cable. So if you've got a high resistance joint, the data still gets through. And so you'll hear people in the industry say, well, I plugged a laptop in there and it worked perfectly. I plugged this VoIP phone or wireless access point in there and it's not. It won't draw power, or it keeps rebooting all the time. You need a tool that's going to be able to work that out, whether it's, hey, is it my switch port? Is it my device? Or is it my cabling? And the thing to look at, as Jim said, looking at the resistance unbalance measurements, it's probably sitting there, poor quality patch cords or something. You need a tool that can pick that up and say, whoa, I've got a problem. I'm not getting the PoE I'm expecting. I better take an hour, go back and have a deeper look at what's going on here. And I remember one of my clients, they inherited a school, quite a large school. It was in Sydney, Australia. And none of the couple of hundred wireless access points were working. And the school district sacked the original cabler and brought this new guy on. He's a friend. I've known him for many years. And he said, wow, that Fluke guy, that Wayne from Fluke told me I should check this. And he did. And the balances were all out. And he told me, he bought me a cup of coffee. So I got something going. He told me that all he did was send his team in and they re-punched down all the connections correctly with the right punch down tool. He said, I don't know what they were using, but
not a screwdriver.
Yes.
Instead, the wire was sitting up here in the IDC rather than sitting down here in the IDC. So he just punched it down and all those wireless access point problems disappeared. It took him a couple of hours to fix the problem. But because he had the right tools and they were able to make the right measurement, and it was the appropriate measurement for the time, he now owns all that business for that school district. And that's the key. It hit home to me that you do need certification, but when you've taken over the network and nothing's working, you need the right tool to be able to enable you to make an informed decision of what your next troubleshooting step should be. And that's where qualification comes in.
So if I were to go through, let me switch over to the pile of tools here. I mean, if we look at something like the Intellitone, that's going to tell me that I have all 8 conductors make it all the way through, right? If I use the wire map feature on there, it's going to tell me which cable. If I take
but not the distance to open if one of them is open.
Correct. So it would tell me that one's open, but it's not going to tell me where that is, right? If I move up to something like the micro scanner, that is going to show me that their distance to open, right?
Correct.
It's going to show me that I've got the cable, that all the pairs are good. If I plug it into an active device, it's going to tell me what that active device is advertising and what the PoE voltage is. But if I have a resistance problem like Wayne was talking about, this isn't going to tell me, it's not going to help me identify a problem like that. Right?
Correct.
Because it's not drawing the load.
Yeah, it'll tell you if you're connected to a switch port, but not which switch port. It will tell you what is being advertised by the switch for PoE and what is being advertised by the switch for connection speeds up to 10 gig, but it doesn't connect.
So if if I'm putting in a network and I'm plugging anything in, having something like this at the very least allows me to make sure that I'm connected up to an active device. And if I can't connect, is there a problem with the cable?
Yeah,
right?
I think, and the first time that you use your microscanner to find out that the cable is open at this end instead of that end, and you save yourself having to walk there, or you transmit from the microscanner to the Intellitone probe there and find the port on the patch panel that it's located, just having to walk back and forth one time, that's probably going to pay for the tool.
And then as we move up, and I'm going to use my cable IQ for a prop right now, but as I move into a qualifier, now I'm able to draw the current. I'm able to draw power. I'm able to see, can I get the class of service that I'm looking for? I can't do that with this one. I can with the Link IQ. If there's a problem with the cable, I can move up from just being able to tell, is there an open or is there a short, to is that problem caused by near-end crosstalk? Is it caused by insertion loss? So I'm able to give some more information to the person that I need to talk to get the problem solved. Because as a networking person, the thing I always hate is when someone goes, the network's down. You go, can you give me any clue as to what? No. And so if I can come back to the person that installed the cabling, I'll go, hey, we're seeing that's failing near-end crosstalk. Well, that gives them at least a starting point to say that I'm not just saying it doesn't work. I'm saying that, we did some initial testing and it looks like this could be the cause.
Absolutely. And that, knowing that there's a switch on the far side. And again, the microscanner is just checking continuity. The cable IQ and the new Link IQ are going to measure signal and noise. Not against the standard. And that's the one thing we're talking about as we move up to the big boy.
Well,
I won't interrupt, but
I think that's a good point.
When we say qualifier, that's a marketing term. Anyone can say qualifier. There's not an 1152 standard that says a qualifier will run this test with this accuracy.
Okay, and so then that goes, we can take that all the way back to throughput testing. We can take it to what is good enough. And it seems like when we get into some of those, that becomes more subjective, right? I mean, with the certifier, it's very objective. This measurement compared to this standard, pass or fail. As we start getting away from that, where we don't have a standards body that's defined a standards for something, and we're looking at some of that, it gets a little, as we go move our way down, it gets fuzzier and fuzzier. Because if I do a throughput test with iPerf and I have a device that I'm pretty confident will do 928 megabits per second, and I get 850. Is that good enough? Well, probably for most applications I'm ever going to run, that's just fine. But how do I assign it a pass-fail if there isn't a hard and fast number that everybody follows? And I guess that's a big one when I look at a Linkware report that I got from a DSX 8000 and it says pass and I get that check mark. I know that is passed compared to that test limit, and that limit is documented.
Yeah, and a certifier from company A and a certifier from company B that meet level 3E accuracy should give similar results. Whereas a qualifier from company A and a qualifier from company B don't necessarily have to line up.
Right.
There's no organization behind that that's telling you what the performance should be of the qualifier.
I think the closest we come is RFCs. Now, if we remember back in the mean old days, RFC 2544 gave us a way of looking at a network, but yeah, it had its flaws as well. It's not as good as it should be. What's the other one? Y15, Y.1564, wasn't it? Yeah, where you could set a way of putting packets out across the network and have a look at what is happening there. So, there have been some benchmarks there. But I think the point that you guys have brought out that with certification, there is a definite line drawn into the sand, a yes or no line. Will this cable work? Will it won't work? Whereas when you get to throughput, it's what are you willing to accept, and it's who put the packet generator together and how, inter-packet timings, all that sort of thing. How was that all put together? If you're sending all ones, all zeros, or continuous ones and zeros, that puts a different load on the network and a different way that the active equipment has got to deal with that load.
How long do you run it for?
Yeah. And how long do you run it for? There's no standard around that. Everyone seems to have their own thoughts about it. But at least with qualification, you're looking at it. I'll go back to the term fit for purpose. Is what I have got here and what I am dealing with fit for the purpose I want to use it for? And if I've got a problem, where in the hell is my problem?
So I think that I like that term fit for purpose, because it is looking at how am I going to use the tool. If I have something like the DSX 8000, I mean, that goes well beyond just testing. It's going to tell me, I mean, I can tell right down to a foot or so where that bad connector is. And if I'm testing an installation where I have 10,000 drops, it gives me a very fast way to go in and test that. So if I'm an installer, having a tool like that compares it to a standard. So when I'm getting paid to do a job and somebody wants assurance that I did that job and I complied with the standard that's been set forth for that job, having a tool like that I can very quickly go in and test that and compare that to that standard, it's worth that money. I need to spend that kind of money for a tool that's going to have an accurate enough measurement. Because if I came in with a qualifier and I installed 5,000 drops, I said I qualified them for you. That, I don't know, you might run into some issues getting somebody to accept those results.
The difference between barely compliant and good and great cabling. And,
right.
The standard's been around for a long time. I think TSB 67 came out in about 94, 95. And I haven't had the experience of people coming back to me and saying, oh, I certified the cabling and it's always worked, but boy, that wasn't worth the effort. No, the cabling is a non-issue. The cabling works. We may undervalue that, but the standard has worked for us. And if somebody has a beef with the standard and they say, hey, you're asking too much, or you should be measuring something else, please join the standards bodies. Share your research. I mean, you're allowed to do that.
Right.
And of course, it's a standard. It's not code. Do whatever the hell you want. But I struggle to find a defect in the standard. I find I wish the standard did a little bit more. I wish TCL was a field test. Maybe I wish TCL was a field test. There's a cabling manufacturer yelling at me right now.
There's a
cable doesn't need it. Okay. But I think the compromises that have been made and where the standard is today, it has served the industry well.
Yeah. it's a benchmark. And, if you consider a full channel where you can got 4 transitions in there, you've got cross connects, you've got equipment cords, you can have a consolidation point, and you've got what I would call a work outlet cord. You run, say, an iPerf across there, and it doesn't work. Where are you going? Yeah, Murphy's law says it's probably in the consolidation point that's up in the roof space. But how do you know without getting a certification tool? It's got something like HDTDX, HDTDR on it, where we can get you within very short distance of where that actual problem is, and clearly identify it. Or you could go to a qualification tool that's actually going to say, well, you've got a near-end crosstalk issue that's preventing the bandwidth, and you then know what you're looking at. And sorry, I've used iPerf myself or throughput testing myself, but when something's wrong, it just says something's broken. It doesn't tell me where the problem lies, and that's more important today, where I've got to get it fixed quickly than just knowing I've got a problem. Man, I know I've got heaps of problems, but knowing what I need to go and fix is more important than knowing I've got problems. That's the way I look at it.
So there was a question about whether this session's recorded. We are recorded. If you're watching it on YouTube, it'll use the same link. So it's automatically being recorded on YouTube. And you can go back and take a look at it later, as many times as you want to hear the three of us go hash over and over this.
Don't know that I want to hear us once.
Yeah. No, I think, and that was, one of the big things I wanted to do out of this was really take a look at, if people are looking at what tools should I buy. And I'm a big tool guy no matter what I'm doing. I mean, we can't fix it if we can't measure it. And we can't be assured that it's going to work. I've always joked, if I worked for a company like Fluke Networks and there was a piece of equipment that wasn't quite working right, and the engineering manager came to me and said, well, why isn't this working right? And I said, it's a mystery. That's not going to go over well, right? You need to have the right piece of equipment. So if you go into a company like Fluke Networks, you're going to find data analyzers, oscilloscopes, all kinds of test measurement equipment that test and measurement tools, and troubleshoot those. We need that same equipment for our network. And when it comes to cabling, having a tool that will help us figure out, is it going to work, and where the problem is becomes important.
Depending on the importance of your network. If you can be down all day and no one's yelling at you.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that was when I was the network administrator for a company here in Seattle. We used to joke that, they would never give us any budget for anything. They'd say that we were a cost center. So, we said, okay, let's shut down for a day and let's see how that goes. And, we never did, but the network is critical. If you ask somebody how important the network is, they'll come back and say, well, we couldn't run without it. But if you say, I need this money to buy these tools, they'll say, you can figure out a way. And I think that is to the detriment of a lot of network administrators. And I know that I've written enough code and wired enough. Well, somebody a long time ago got a land meter before me. And I guess I was a little bit jealous. And I said, what are you using it for? And they said, I'm using it to see if this network connection's good. So I took a 9-volt battery and wired it to the AUI connector of a Ethernet transceiver. And I showed that I could see if a link was active using a 9-volt battery and a AUI transceiver. In fact, we used to solder those things together and give them out to people so that they could.
I have one of those from the original way back in the, what was that class called? The CNSE.
Yeah.
Mr. Klimke was teaching us that.
So, we could go in and test that. In fact, Mr. Klimke's on. He sent me a comment. Dan's on the webcast here with us. So, but I was doing myself a disservice in a way in that I was trying to circumvent getting the right tool. And we try, as network administrators, oftentimes we try and show value by saving some money by not buying the correct tools to do the job. And I think it's so critical that we have the right equipment, that the right equipment to do the job.
Yeah, and again, they've got more important things for you to be doing than MacGyvering a network solution.
Yes,
there are bigger and more important projects.
What I say to people, you can be penny wise or pound foolish.
Yeah.
Saving some pennies it could be costing you some big dollars in the background.
Yep. Yes. And especially if you build something that is so complicated, only you can operate it. And then, then you leave and then somebody else doesn't know.
Job security. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, to go back to things like iPerf, iPerf has a whole bunch of parameters and so on in it. And if you don't know how to set it up right and you don't know how to interpret the results, what does that mean? And so it's, yeah. So there you go.
Yeah. Hey, Mike, I will take advantage of this to give a plug for the classes that you offer through Network Protocol. Yeah, I'm going to get the company name wrong. Excuse me here.
Yeah. In fact, here I can.
No. It is a common question that we get. Hey, is there training? How does this thing work? There should be free training. Yeah.
There we go.
We do have classes,
there we
the
go.
CCTP classes. Mike has been teaching those for years. He has great experience in these. Yes, you can watch a YouTube video to learn something, but having somebody look over your shoulder and say, hey, here's where it's getting stuck, or having someone you can reach out to in real time and say, hey, why is it behaving this way? I just want to give an important plug here to Mike's classes, and thank Mike for putting this whole event together, and thank Mike for getting up early to come and join us.
Well, thanks,
I'll get breakfast.
Yeah. Yeah. It's my dinner time, your breakfast time. Well, and we've got the verses back behind me. And that's one of the things that we did with the class is we've set it up so that people can remote into a versive. So everybody that takes the class is actually driving a real versive during the class. And, when we talk about standards and all that, I just had somebody send me a comment that got done with the last class and said, we were setting up the wrong standard. In fact, I had gone to Detroit to do a class on some other equipment. And they said, do you know anything about this DSX 5000? And I said, I know a little bit about it. What's up? They said, it's a horrible piece of equipment. I said, yeah, I got to hear this. You show me why it's bad. And they said, it's failing all of our cabling. And I thought, it's the tester?
That sounds like, yes, yeah. It's the Fluke that failed it. Everything was fine until the Fluke said fail.
So
that's a common one.
How often do you use this? And we use it all the time. So I knew enough to go look at the adapter and the auto test count, and it was 15. And so I thought, yeah, okay, they've used it a few times, but that's okay. Let's take a look. And I said, show me the test setup. Show me how you're testing it. And so we went in and looked at the test setup, and they'd set the cable type to Cat5e. But what was the test limit set to?
The default limit. It's the test limit you have to set. 6A.
So it was whatever. It was 6A probably at the time. And, it's like comparing me to my lifting capability to Andre the Giant, or really anyone that works out on a regular basis. And saying, well, can't you lift that amount of weight? No, I can't. You got to compare my ability to lift weight to a guy that spends most of his time out here working on networking stuff. So they were comparing that 5E cable to a standard it could never meet. And so knowing how to set this equipment up is really key and helps you maintain that investment in both the equipment and the people that are operating. So, And I have to thank Jim when it comes to the class, because Jim puts the course material, or Jim and Wayne actually work,
Yeah, Wayne,
put a significant amount of work
absolutely.
into the course material. So it makes my job easier when it comes to doing that. But, well, we've burned up almost an hour just chatting about this stuff. So I hope that in the end, that for everyone that's taken the time to watch this, that this is given some clarity to where, where certification and qualification and throughput testing start fitting in. And there's never a absolute. The certification tool is going to meet those needs of a person that needs to certify cabling. And the qualification tool is going to meet the needs of the person that needs to make sure that that link is going to support, or looks like it's going to support that technology. And if I need to test beyond the physical cabling, well, then I need to start moving up the stack from there.
That'll be for another day.
Yes. Yep. All right. Well, I'd like to thank both of you for your time. I know that your time's quite valuable, and hopefully we can get you back I'll have to do another one this month, Wayne, so I can get you back again or drag you.
Well, I'm just putting my feet up for a while, but you could always send the invitation. 40 years worth of experience, I'm always happy to share. So even in retirement, I'm happy to join these calls and share what I've learned.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you very much. And hopefully we'll see both of you in a future webcast.
Look forward to it.
All right. Thank you.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks, everyone.